communicate with the board. So thank you, Chris, for joining us. I'm going to set the scene. Oh,
I'll say what an intro. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm going to set the scene a little bit. So joining the boards is a steep learning curve. So no longer a CIO is in a comfortable position of just reporting to a board member. You also know how to look at kind of like the politics and challenges that are faced within senior management of organization. They, or the future you, are now at the top table, and everyone in the business knows where the buck stops. So whilst it's a very exciting time, it's also one that's full of potential traps, politics, and bureaucracy. So during this workshop, we're just going to understand how to approach the board objectives, what to include in reports, how to approach your strategy, and to also tweak communication. As you're now becoming the engine and not the anchor, we'll look at how you kind of put digital on the board's agenda and improve digital literacy from the top table down. We're doing this workshop a little differently in the sense that we've set you all homework. So see, we're all going to give you A-star grades by the end of it. But we're going to go through the groups. So there's 3 groups today. You're all going to kind of present your initial thoughts, and then we're going to run through feedback at the end and kind of just discuss it from there. So the question that we set you was a broad one. I'll give you that. But it was the board wants to talk about future investment in IT and technology. What do you present? I'm going to go to group 1 first. So before then, Chris, is there anything that you want to add before we get started? Or shall we jump straight into what the different groups had in mind?
No, I don't think I can add very much. I mean, it is a wide question, but I mean that's unfortunately the kind of thing that we get asked often. Sometimes it's you have to kind of figure it out for yourself. So it'd be interesting to see what angles people come at it from.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So Tara, Chris, and Jeff, you were in group 1. I don't know if you want to start with kind of initial approach or if you want to speak individually, but who would like to start us off?
I shared a few thoughts on email.
You go, Tara, because it's your. I don't know if you saw my message last night.
Yeah, I did. I asked the response. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I had lots of questions. It's like, well, what are the board interested in? Because you've got to try and understand, well, what's going to interest them. Otherwise, it's just a tech presentation. Are they trying to save money? Are they pushing for growth, competitive advantage in certain areas? What's going to get them excited and interested, I guess? And then my other key question is kind of, well, what's their current state of technology? Are they in we've got loads of technical debt and we need to get out of that kind of state, or are they in quite a nice platform for moving forwards and are they kind of in a nice stable position, and we can just start talking about all the exciting opportunities? But not knowing any of that, you kind of have to kind of make some assumptions. And so kind of the broad themes that I kind of suggested, cloud more generally, in terms of they're quite a small company. They're not going to have necessarily a large IT team that can support things 24/7, and they're not necessarily going to have as many IT people as they probably need to support the company. So it's like, well, what are the opportunities there? Have they still got some kit that needs moving? Have they got services that would be better moving? And yeah, getting themselves, so they've got a stable foundation. Next one was around automation, and Chris Tiprinder's feedback was kind of linking that in with the AI, which I've got as a separate theme. So automation, opportunities for efficiency, you would hope would be of interest to a board. Ideally sharing some real examples of things that have already been done in the automation space, some data, customer service improvements, and how that could potentially scale up further. AI links in nicely with the automation theme around opportunities for savings, opportunities to have some competitive advantage. I also thought the board have probably heard some things around AI, but they might not necessarily understand everything. There might be some myths that misunderstandings of what AI is or isn't, and that might be an opportunity to dispel some myths. And again, some examples of what might be possible to get them understanding what might be Date. And then again, linking in nicely with all the others is around data and analytics, and what does the board need that they don't have currently to make their decisions. There's always a whole load of data hidden around, and are the board getting what they need when they need it, the timeliness of data as well. So they were the kind of themes that I thought might be of interest to a board. Afterwards, I did think about cyber, and if they're not interested in the shiny vision of the future, they might be interested in the risks and the scariness that they need to invest in. But yeah, they were the kind of things that I thought. Chris and Jeff.
Yeah, so great intro there, Tara, and thank you for putting your thoughts down on the mail first. So I think probably what I would try and do as well, building on what Tara's just covered off, is try and work the room a little bit. So I'm assuming on the board, for instance, there will be a people officer, director of HR. So start to talk about people, skills, retention as well. So some of the great points that Tara mentioned around cloud, automation. We need to attract talent. We need to retain our top technical talent, even if it's not a large organization. We still want to use our people as a differentiator. So investing in those types of technologies allows us to retain the best talent and keep and attract top talent. Also, from a cloud perspective, assuming that obviously there'll be a CFO around the table, start talking about the potential changing in financial practices and accounting practices, moving to cloud, right? So CapEx, OpEx, all the stuff that we love, right? As IT leaders, we need to pitch that as a potential opportunity, but also it means that we as an organization will need to start to manage things like OpEx risk through cloud differently as well. So yeah, just a bit more targeted to maybe not just the CEO, but to a few of the other stakeholders around the table. The only other thing I'll just cover off before I bring Chris into it is Gen AI. Right. So I think we're all very familiar, and I'm sure our board would be very familiar with the risks and opportunities around utilizing Gen AI internally, right? What it could mean for us to become more efficient, etc. But I also would want to turn that on its head to start to get the board members to start thinking about how we need to be prepared for the customers using Gen AI on us. All right. So they're going to start to use Gen AI to look for best offers on products and services that this company could offer. So how do we make sure that we're on the front foot and that we can utilize that technology to our advantage? Yeah, so that was it. Chris?
The only thing I'd add is support everything you guys have said is is really how we present it. So I'd say it was very much a story or a sort of a narrative thing. So to make it clear that and it depends on whether the organization, whether IT is also leading transformation or not. If the organization, and that, I think that, but I always, when I've worked, is try and see IT not as the cost center, but an enabler of this transformation that we can do to do that. And I think that gives you far more credibility on a modern board, in my opinion, if you can show that you can, use technology to deliver these business outcomes, which you guys have talked about, rather than just saying, cost is obviously a thing, but this is how we'll transform the organization, use technology to reduce costs, rather than we can, obviously potentially we can buy stuff cheaper, but be more than just we can deliver your IT services cheaper, because they could probably have an outsource who come in and claim they can do that, or though whether they would or not is a moot point.
Thanks, Gribble. Any kind of final summary that you want to add there, or shall we move on to group 2? I'm going to take your silence as golden. So, group 2, so Paul and Tom, you guys are up next. I don't know if one of you would like to start with your approach to the question, and how you sort of start delivering that to the boards. So Tom, Paul, who would like to kick things off?
start. So we didn't have a chance to, we haven't had a chance to speak, I'm afraid. So this is going to be two individuals, I guess. Most of what I've got noted here has actually already been covered. Just narratively speaking, I would approach the board with I would gain before I approach the board, but I would make sure I understood the organization's strategy. So in terms of writing stuff, I made some assumptions, which are fairly basic. We want to grow, we want to be more efficient, we want to make better use of data. I mean, basically that's every organization, possible exception of growth. So I, again, made a lot of assumptions about where the tech state was, which I know Tara and others mentioned. But I was writing, I wrote some notes about setting foundations and sort of really grounding it in the why, and why spending this money would really help. So I also mentioned a cloud-first strategy, which I'm assuming we've got, building blocks around automation infrastructure, and then talking about how that successful deployment of technology allows us to use certain features of the cloud, like elasticity and so on, and auto-scaling to ensure that on the one hand we're provisioning effectively, but on the other hand we're remaining cost efficient. So we're saying that's got so really grounding it into that efficiency space, and then also the effective tooling that enables both monitoring of costs and environmental impact. I talked a bit about investment in our cyber security suite to adopt a zero trust flexible security bubble. Again, strategically speaking, most organizations don't care about their security posture apart from the fact they know they need it to be done. So it's how do we, so that strategically speaking, it's how do we position security so that it is done invisible, and then it's as invisible and unintrusive to colleagues as possible. And again, focusing the automation and again linking that automation back into the scaling costs of saying, well, actually we can do all this stuff manually, we can do it all old school ways, but it's going to cost us a fortune because of the various reasons, and we'll have to hire loads of people. But if we invest in this direction, we can pull ourselves out of that and say, well, actually we can either use the people we've got to focus on future developments and direction, or we can talk about the fact we don't need to increase the size of our workforce, or whatever position we happen to be in at that particular moment. And then really linking those things back and saying this builds as a foundation from which we can go anywhere, really. We've got a strong foundation with which enables us to be nimble as an organization. So if we want to go over there, we can scale in that direction and build that way. If we can scale over that way in that direction, and then sort of grounding the fact that it's good engineering and good technology enables this, which is what we actually want as an organization. The next step, talking about data. Again, we don't know what our data aspirations are in this particular space, but I'm sure we've got some. And then depending on where we are on the available budget, what the organization considers is necessary as far as things like data lakes are concerned. There are lots of different ways of implementing that kind of thing. Obviously, the detail of that would depend on the specifics of the organization, but we either go, well, we need some data because we just need solid flowing of data for internal intelligence, or we're a data-driven organization if that's, and therefore we need blah 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 data lakes and data meshes, MDMs, all those kind of things, but in that direction. And again, that would depend on what our organization actually is. And then I'd make the point that those are foundations which, as long as we invest correctly, take us in the direction of enabling artificial intelligence as things come on stream. And again, depending on the type of company, either we want to be on the bleeding edge or we just want to be not being left behind. But either way, we need to have some kind of data concern in that space. And then I linked it back to the need to invest in colleagues on the training side of things. So it's all well and good to give everyone all the data in the world, but then if they don't know what to do with it, then that is everyone's a complete waste of time. And so that sort of puts us on an organizational level on the front foot for building for the future. And then of course that also spirals into, like, for the technical staff, we also want them to be getting some training into the space of learning about the future on a technical level so that they can be part of this conversation and part of growth and direction. And I sort of ran out of typey at that point. So I thought that was probably enough for the time being.
No, brilliant. Thanks, Tom. I think we've just lost Paul, so I'm going to jump to group 3, which is Romeo and Sam. So I think Susan, Ian, no, they're not here. So Romeo and Sam, I don't know if one of you want to jump in and start talking about your approach to this.
Yeah.
Morning all.
Oh,
Oh,
please.
wait, you carry on.
No, I wanted to say that we were kind of in the same situation as with Tom, right? So I don't think we caught up before. So, I mean, if you want to start with your perspective then first, and then I can go next as well, that's fine.
No, you carry on.
So the way I sort of looked at it actually is how would I structure the presentation to really truly get to the point, right? In terms of, start with the why, like what are the the 3 main categories where we see challenges, but also, I guess, changes in the trends. So for example, like, cloud, everyone mentioned that, but I think some of the critical point there also why cloud is important in relation to also generative AI and what's going on with like artificial intelligence and how much it also enables some of the utilization of those technologies. So really start there, exposing the why and why it's critical to invest into something like cloud infrastructure and modernizations. And then look at what is the ask actually, like how much money we would be asking for, how many resources we would be asking for. Is it a 1 million, 2 million project, for how long? And what would be then the projected growth and impact or the milestone that we would be tracking against, right? So is this going to decrease our operational costs, for example, with how much? What is the gain? And how many data centers could we close as a result of this project? And what would be actually expanding towards in terms of generative AI as well? Would it mean additional revenue growth, or would it mean some other aspects that would be impacting our customers? So really structure all those initiatives with a why, what is the ask, and what would be the projected impact and the growth itself. And the 3 initiatives that I was thinking of is cloud with a focused enablement on generative AI. The second one would be cybersecurity enhancements, especially given the fact that cyber threats are constantly increasing as well. And the last one would be training and education and talent to basically lead these initiatives as well. And then sort of certainly conclude with a, I guess the punchline of like, okay, we're asking for 3 million or 4 million divided into these 3 programs. And then, we're going to deliver on the KPIs around either reduced operational costs, for example, increased cybersecurity footprint, or, higher reliability and uptime. And then lastly, we would be reducing our talent retention, for example, or enhancing our talent retention rates, and then potentially increase our, or improve our, culture and customer satisfaction as well. So really structure it into 3 of those 3 initiatives, into those 3 pillars, basically, and on why we're looking at them, what is the ask, and what would be the projected growth and impact of them.
Cool. Yeah, I think we didn't chat. Maybe we went down very similar lines. And apologies, my camera's not working this morning, so you've got a blank space while I'm talking. The only other thing that kind of I thought about was what kind of investment are they actually looking for? I work for a charity. If the board say, let's talk about the investment, they usually want to ask me to do more with less and take money away. So I think we've all made an assumption that it was a growth investment, more money to do some more things, but it might actually be less money. And I think clarifying that before you go in is really important. If you're pitching for 4 or 5 extra million to do cloud compute and some Gen AI, machine learning, RPA, and actually they're trying to give you less money, you need to look at your FTEs or where actually you're spending it. You want to go in there informed. So I think a bit of work before you get there. And I think I'd also try and link it back to the kind of the organization's strategic risk register. Like, where are we carrying the most risk? Like, where do we think that technology can help? Is it over retention of data on network drives, for example? Actually investing in cloud is really good. Is it our external presentation for our firewalls isn't good? Then cybersecurity is absolutely the way that we want to look to start investing in. Is it around automation? Then yeah, as you said, AI, machine learning can help with that, kind of being more nimble. But I think the only one we haven't mentioned is around the kind of the remote work infrastructure. You mentioned cloud from a database, and I know quite a lot of big companies are now mandating a 3-day week linked to kind of performance benefits and everything else to be in the office. But there is still a number of organizations that are fully remote or going to be fully on-prem. So if they want to look at more devolved workforce, potentially international, you've got the investment then in the kind of the tool sets that enable that to kind of be enabled. I think the overarching game kind of use technology not as a series of tools, but kind of one of their strategic assets that can actually drive that innovation. And I'd look to stress the benefits, even if you are cost limited, with the ROI versus a risk and reward type approach, and more of a kind of, we could do this, but not this, and kind of present options rather than just going in with my idea.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. Caroline and Mark, would you like to take a stab as a sort of group 4?
Sure, Romy, happy to do that. Sure, Mark, if you want to go first.
I can do, but I joined last, so I don't know what group 4 is. Sorry, so I'm going to have to just listen.
No worries, Mark.
You'll be all right, Caroline. Don't worry.
Sure, I can go first, no problem. So I also joined late, so I'm trying to follow up, but no, I think everyone has made some great contributions already. So I think how I would present it, it's the first thing I'd presented, what is the value or the benefit that we're trying to get. So in addition to the investment, what value are we trying to get, and what is the return on investment for the board? I think that's a crucial point to mention, really. So in terms of, in addition of showing the proposed portfolio, which for me would include AI, automation, a bit of robotics as well, because of the industry I'm in, some cloud as well, and we have some products in condition-based monitoring, which is related to data, but also to physical products. So that's basically how I would pitch a portfolio. But I think it's basically, what is the return on investment, and how is it going to work with the vision of the board? So I think what's important for them is, how does it link to the business vision? And that's how I would present it in a nutshell, in addition to what everyone else had already said. So.
Brilliant. Okay, well done, everyone. What I kind of sort of caught already is everyone's taken quite a different approach. But Chris, I'll pass it over to yourself. Do you want to start with maybe like a general kind of feedback of what you thought, and then we can kind of break down to each group, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. So, some really excellent ideas and kind of approaches there. I think everybody kind of did what I think we would all do, is look at it and go, well, it depends, doesn't it? What you're trying to achieve, and that's, it's a fair point. The issue with the board is often they don't specify that in too much detail. They're kind of, it's more of a, this is our business, this is what we need to achieve. We've got a strategy, and let's assume that the business has identified strategy. As the IT lead, the person that's at this point, let's assume that we're on the board, and we're the person that's being looked at to all times to be the person that's going to own this stuff. Is kind of like you said, Carolina, what's the IT response to the strategy that we have, and the tactical considerations around how the business is doing, and what we're trying to achieve this year, or what we want to achieve next year, etc. So I think everybody attacked this from a slightly different angle, all with their own sort of scenarios in their head, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. Lots of kind of technologies, all right? So cloud, is it AI, is it security, whatever it might be, which is again reasonable. The question would be, of course, in your particular industry, what are the technologies that are coming down the line? What are your competitors using? What are your industry associations saying about what's going to happen in your industry in the future? Those kind of things about future facing things are really important to the board. And I think one of the things that I did a few years of CIO advisory working for IDC, and spent quite a lot of time working with CIOs in large organizations. And one of the most common things that I and my colleagues in that advisory team ended up doing was reviewing IT strategy documents and reviewing board reports, because CIOs, just like everybody else around the board, and by the way, this isn't a technology thing, they often worry about how words are going to land with the board. Are they actually going to have the impact they want them to have, or are they going to take away the message that they really want to deliver? And that's kind of really important. You know, sometimes it doesn't matter what you're saying, it matters how you're saying it. And I think somebody said, and I've got a note here, about who is on the board. Yeah, in group one, was talking about, you know, who is in the room, CFO, CEO, sales director, HR. Again, that's really important to think about their particular agendas and what, you know, who are your allies going to be in that room? Who are the people that are going to be behind this? Because it doesn't matter, even if you're a CIO on the board, at the end of the day, you're still there as a service provider within that organization, and you can be add a great deal of value in that. But at the end of the day, the IT is there to allow people to make better decisions about what they do. It doesn't matter whether it's a laptop or a mobile phone or a a device on a machine. Everybody's making decisions based on the information that's presented to them, and if they get better information, they make better, lower risk decisions, generally speaking. And that's the purpose of IT in an organization. So I think that, you know, yeah, I think everybody came from different reasons or different ways. And I think what I'd like to do is just go through some of these things that the different groups said, and maybe give a few scenarios that I've seen before, or maybe things that I think are related to these. So group one really talked about, you know, what is the driver strategically, and a few people mentioned that, and I think that's absolutely right. You know, as a CIO, you kind of, let's assume the company has the strategy. You go in, you do know what the strategy is. You're aware of the strategy. You can say, okay, somebody else said, you know, it's about growth, or it's about, you know, and okay, so if we're going to grow, so you need to know how we're going to grow. What are we going to do to grow? Are we going to sell more of what we normally sell? We're going to sell it in different countries. Are we going to sell different things? Are we going to diversify and get into another market? And if we're going to grow, generally speaking, if you're in a market which is, let's assume that the market is static and the market isn't growing, and we're not just going to rise like, or, you know, all boats in a rising tide. If you're going to grow, generally speaking, what that means is you're going to have to persuade somebody to give you money that used to give it to somebody else. You're going to have to take market share from somebody else. So in order to do that, the question you have to ask your board is, okay, so what are we going to do? What's the compelling reason going to be for somebody to give us money and not give it to their previous supplier? Are we going to be cleaner than them, or cheaper than them, or faster than them, or nicer than them, or whatever it, you know, once you start to understand that, then you've got something you can hook your IT strategy onto. You can say, okay, if we're going to be cheaper, fine. If that's going to be our pitch, we're not going to be Waitrose, we're going to be oldie. That's fine. There's room for all these different models in the market. So, okay, we're going to be oldie. How are we going to be cheaper than our competitors? Are we going to have a smaller number of services, and we're going to focus on those? And that's going to be our efficiency, because we can be very efficient in what we do, rather than offering a great many things. Are we going to invest in better decision making, so we can be in the right time, in the right place? If we talk about like a repair company or something, you know, if you get the right person in the right place with the right tools and the right experience to do the job first time, then you're going to be better than your competitors, and you're going to be cheaper. If you're a manufacturer, if you've got the right parts, and if you've got the right, you know, if you've got the right logistics in place, you can manufacture and you can get things to your customers. You can understand your lead times more effectively. There are always things you can do to make your service more effective and cheaper, or there are things you can do to make it higher quality, or there are things you can do to make it more diverse and give more, you know, give a bigger choice. But you can't do them all, very rarely, right? So as a business, you have to decide those things, and it's part of your job really as a CIO is to squeeze that information out of your board and say, okay, guys, let's really nail this down as to what you want from us, so that when we look at investment in technology, it's going to achieve those things, and we're going to achieve the business outcome. So, you know, those people talked about strategy and about understanding the company's goals and what you're trying to achieve. Spot on. I think, again, then below that, each board member will have their own take on that. So the CFO will want to know, okay, so what's this going to do to my my financial models? So, I mean, quite a few people talked about cloud, and it's a bit of a no-brainer, right? Goes cloud, we get the benefits, we get the scalability, we get the innovation. Yeah, that which is absolutely right. But a lot of organizations, they really struggle with that because they struggle with the move from CapEx, buying tin. Yes, you're constrained by it, but at least you know how much you're going to pay for it. And it's on the balance sheet as an asset rather than buying something as an operational cost. As technologists, we might say, well, yeah, but that's the best way to do it. As the financial people set the rules of the game, so we have to take them on that journey to help them understand how they can cut their budgets in order to make that more, to make it work for them, because they don't like changing their models. But they really don't like it because they like to compare last year with this year and next year. And when you start changing things, that's harder to compare. So those are things that really make the finance people struggle. Just as the move, as we're all making to kind of agile and evergreen software models, most companies are building software for either for their own people or for their clients or their suppliers. Most of us now are sort of building and maintaining software in that sense. And we're not doing it in the way that once upon a time we would, where we would buy a piece of software, again, it would go on the asset list and it would sit there running for, and never change. We're building software, we're building web interfaces, we're building APIs, and they're constantly updated and they're constantly changing. So you always have a group of people maintaining that software. You always have cost on that software. And again, finance people don't like that because they don't see nice demarcations about, okay, that's that version and we've spent that and then we can depreciate that over this amount of time. We have to take our colleagues on this journey about how they can help us manage the finances and how we can help them manage the value. So yeah, you've got your CFO to worry about, you've got your sales director to worry about. Again, I would say that as a CIO, the sales director is often your best friend. It doesn't always seem like that because they're out selling things that you can't necessarily deliver. But also they are the person that has the most clout around the board table often because they're the person the CEO is going to look to deliver the growth and deliver the sales. So if the chief sales guy, sales director, or whatever you want to call them, is if they're on board and they've got an idea and they're bought into the fact that if they only had this technological doohickey or service, they could sell 10% more or send to these regions or whatever, everybody's going to be listening to that. So as a CIO, your sales director is often your best friend, even if they don't seem like that when you first look around the room. So all those people, you've got to think about that in terms of those characters, and that was something that somebody mentioned that. I've got it here. Who's in the room? Yes, again, that was group one. So, I think from that point of view, there was quite a lot of different elements in your presentation in group one, but I think probably the things you said last are probably first in terms of who's in the room, what are you trying to achieve, who owns transformation? Really good point. Is this a business initiative or is it an IT initiative? Again, I actually think it works better when it's a business initiative, but very, very closely supported by IT. Often the IT people are given it to do because the IT people understand project management, they understand complexity, and they understand change in a way that's measurable and manageable. But really what you need is the business to drive it because they're the people that need to use it. Again, somebody mentioned, I think it was in group two, the data. I think it was Tom who say, if you give people data, can they use it? And often if you're driving things from the center, if you're driving things from IT, you can miss that. You can miss the fact that what you're delivering might seem very, very sensible, but the people on the ground can't use it. If it's driven from the business, if it's driven from the ground, and you in IT are very, very closely supporting it, then it's got a far better chance of being successful. So I think from Group 1's point of view, in terms of the things you said, yeah, absolutely, all very valid, but the last things first, and then onto the technology later. As technologists, we tend to think about technology very quickly. It's like, yeah, well, we need cloud, we need cybersecurity and improvements or whatever. But at the end of the day, the board always has like 4 uses for every pound that they've got, right? They've got many, many asks for that pound. Might be from marketing. We could sell more if we had another set of adverts out there. It could from the sales team. We'd sell more if we had another salesperson on the road. From the operations team, well, we'd be more effective if we had a person doing quality checking. Every pound the business spends has got many asks for it. So being able to convert that into investment IT means addressing the concerns and the desires and the fears of people around that board. I mean, I think we're going to say to what Tom said on Group 2. Absolutely, you got to understand the strategy, the growth, the efficiency, the better use of data. But again, it's from the board's point of view, it's often about risk. So what is coming down the line that might cause us to have a problem, either in terms of our governance or our competitors, what they're going to do better than us, or is it, what about, is that our people? Are people going to leave because they see better options somewhere else? So again, absolutely right, but it is about then translating that into risk and mitigation, and then benefit about what's going on. So, I think a lot of what you guys said in Group 2, absolutely right. And again, somebody, I think in Group 2 you were talking about, who owns this? How are you going to build the foundations for growth? So I think that's absolutely right. Group 3, Romeo talked about, they say a lot about cloud. Again, I think that's very, all very valid. But again, probably the secondary conversation, whether cloud is right or wrong is kind of, we all know that it's generally a very good choice, but it's not always. And we need to think about lots of different things before we get there. Sam talked about, what is the outcome? Sometimes it's not about growth, right? So often, yes, we are in everybody's very optimistic we're going to grow. Sometimes it really is about cost down. Well, in my experience, in the last few years, I've never seen anything else but cost down. Everybody wants cost down. Doesn't matter if you're growing, you're going to have to reduce your cost as well in IT. And we've seen a lot of people who have invested in things like 365 over COVID, and then coming out the back of that is that, well, what can we get rid of now? And one of the things that technologists that we can be a little bit precious about is that the fact that we've got a data loss prevention tool, for example, which is really, really good. But we've got something else which we pay for in 365, which is not as good, but it's probably good enough. And in IT, we can kind of hang on to those tools a little bit, like, but that's our favorite thing. That's really good. There's some really cool features there. Again, sometimes if you can slaughter some of those sacred cows and say, actually, do you know what? Let's do something that's good enough that we're already paying for. If you can spring some money then for something that shows benefit around investment, around something strategic, you're far likely to get more investment in the future. So sometimes you have to cut your cloth a bit in order to make a investment later on. Right, my screen's just gone completely blank. Oh, okay, no, it's something that's starting up. Sorry, I thought I'd lost you all. And also, I think, also something that Sam mentioned is about user experience and about what the user is going to achieve from their use of technology. And again, thinking about user design, user-centered design, how can you remove obstacles from your staff in what they do? Again, that's about winning hearts and minds and about making IT a way of improving the business rather than kind of business prevention, which it sometimes turns into. And the kind of last speaker, say Carolina, we've already talked about a little bit about what you said, but I think I'd like to just again, repeat that I think you're absolutely right. That kind of link to business vision is what it's all about. If you can show that, and sometimes, of course, if I'm honest, the strategy is set and then everybody forgets about it because everybody looks at the next shiny thing. That's fine, but it's your best way of convincing everybody that you've got a plan to deliver on the long-term sustainable view of what the business achieves, because you go back to the strategy and say, well, I'm going to deliver against this strategy. If you're going to tell me not to if you like, but in that case, what is it? Is the strategy changed? And generally speaking, the strategy hasn't changed, but maybe the flavor of the month has changed. So going back to that strategy is generally a good thing. So I think I completely understand the angle that everybody's come at this from, and I think the key is always to understand your business and to get close to those people around the board, build your relationships, play the game. It's everybody's got their own agenda, not necessarily in a bad way, but everybody wants to achieve the things that they are measured upon. And the sad fact is that not everybody can do that together. Sometimes somebody will be able to have to achieve their objectives at the expense of somebody else. And as a CIO, the way to win that is not to play that game, but to be aware of it and support your colleagues in the best way you can. And then you become somebody who's not only on the board and valued around that board, but actually can help to shape the way the business operates in future. I don't know. I think it'd be useful to find if there's any questions or any thoughts from anybody else, because everybody else has heard everybody else's pitch, and it would be interesting to see if anybody's got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth there, Chris. So any, I guess, of initial questions on that feedback? Tom, I see sort of your hand up first. Do you want to start with a sort of initial question?
Yeah, I couldn't find the raise hand button in this in Zoom. Apologies. So I went the analog approach. So a lot of both what we've said and the comments that you've given, Chris, are based off the assumption that this organization is actually functioning effectively. So we've all, in various ways, said, well, we need to find out what the organization's vision and strategy is and embed our statements in it. Obviously, the assumption there is that there is an organization vision and strategy that is, as opposed to some high-level statement, which is sort of like, hey, let's be good at what we do. So have you got any, in my experience, having worked in the public sector for quite a long time, quite often there is no vision beyond something incredibly vague at the top. Have you got any tips at all for working in that sort of vacuum, and how you sort of essentially sort of put forward your stall when you can't glue it into a clear organizational vision?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're right. It's sadly the case that a lot of organizations don't have a strategy, or the strategy they have is pretty vague, right? And it is a question of thinking about, kind of, as I said before, in which case, if you look at a vague, all right, we're going to be brilliant at this next year or whatever, it's trying to drill down to that a little bit and find the stakeholders who are, because there always are these people in the organization, in the public sector and the private sector, right? These people do exist. It's just a matter of finding them to say, what do you mean by that, and what can we help you with in terms of achieving that particular improvement? So I think the example I used before was kind of Aldi and Waitrose. Are you going to be full of lovely things but expensive, or you're going to be fewer things, nearly as lovely but cheap? You kind of have to ask the question about, in order to achieve that, what are you going to do? And if you're delivering services in government, often you're saying, okay, we're going to make this service. There's a thing in government at the minute, isn't there, where they got 75 services they want to make. great or something. There's some sort of there's a definition somewhere of great services. Okay, so what do you mean by that? You know, in terms of this service, what do we mean by that? What are the priorities around what we can change? Because again, prioritization is like a magic, it's like an art, isn't it? Somebody will say, we need these 4 things from our team. We'll say, which one do you want first? Oh well, we can't decide, you decide. And so you're always going to be wrong. You're always going to let somebody down. So it's about trying to understand at a kind of granular level what is going to be the thing that changes the game in that particular area, and kind of work to that and play it back and almost extrapolate from that to a strategy. And then if you can do that and articulate that and say, okay, well, from what I understand here, this is going to happen and that's going to happen, and then we're going to it's going to look like this at the end, then you can at least give people the chance to say, no, I don't agree with that. That's in terms of working in that void, I always think that if you can fill the void with something and give people a chance to disagree with it, that's better than not, because then at least you've got something to work to and you can get on with it. And then if somebody said, well, I don't agree, you should have done that, at least you can say, well, I did articulate this is what we're going to do and this is why we're going to do it. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So you're basically saying almost sort of straw man the vision and say, I'm assuming based on what I know that this is our vision, and therefore until someone tells me different, this is what we're going to do, and sort of work in that direction. Yeah,
and kind of working out loud in that sense, and encourage the debate rather than it's very easy and quite. It is always tempting to sort of get your head down and do something, because if you don't, you're never going to deliver anything. But encouraging the debate, I think, is healthier in the long run, because you at least will give people the chance to actually do the job that maybe should have done in the first place and refine the vision until it's something that everybody agrees.
Thank you.
I see Mark has found the digital raise hand. Do you want to go next?
I did the pair of Google, it's everybody's friend. Hi Chris, you go.
Hi Mark.
I guess interesting listening. I mean, obviously I'm with Tom in terms of public sector and specifically NHS, which has always had its challenges because everybody's a customer, and growth actually is probably one of the things that we don't want to do. We want to reduce almost and to get people well. But I guess when I'm just listening to all of this and linking it into the strategies, etc., I guess I'm thinking sometimes, when is it time to be brave, but without necessarily being reckless? Because like you say, you can't always be right, but sometimes you have to put that suggestion out there for it to be knocked down. And I guess it's how can you do that without necessarily losing like face, or them thinking, what is he? Is he a maverick? Does he not know what he's doing, etc., etc.? How do you kind of like balance all of that out?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mark, and that's about culture in many ways, isn't it? Because if you're in a culture where ideas or suggestions are going to be seen as what on earth is this person talking about, then you have to weigh that up in how you attack these things. But I would always say that it's better to have that discussion. And I mean, I don't often worry about losing face too much, in as much as there's enough to do, and you need to have several things going on, and you need to have your champions that can see the value in because we're talking about strategic things here, but there should always be tactical things that are going on that are delivering benefit to people. So it's almost about weighing up your champions and the support and the kind of the credibility and the belief that you have in certain areas against the risk of speaking out or making a suggestion. If you're in a place where the organization is dysfunctional and IT, for example, is in a bad place, and well, sometimes you haven't got much to lose, right? And you have to accept that this might be the last year you're in that job, but that's not necessarily your fault. It's some companies are dysfunctional. This is how it is. But if you are actually in a place where you can say, okay, there are some things I can build on here in my tactical delivery, we shouldn't really be worried about losing face, and we shouldn't be worried about having an opinion, because that's what we're paid to do at this level. You're paid to have an opinion. You're paid to put yourself out there, and you should always be able to at least intellectually justify the position you've taken. And that sometimes we are going to be wrong, right? So I think that's just part of the, getting into that bigger, more exposed role. Is you kind of have to live with that that risk sometimes. But I don't think it's as much of a risk as sometimes we think.
Yeah, true.
We've got time for. Oh, sorry, go on, Mark.
I was going to say, just as a follow up, I guess, is sometimes as well, it's like we say, we're trying to hook it it's about getting intelligence of the organization to know what is right at that, because often timing's key as well, isn't it? And if you get the timing right at the right time, then you'll see your idea then go forward. So is there some aspects of trying to understand where pockets of the organization are trying to do transformation, and then understand how you can then use that within your strategy to be able to communicate it into the board?
Yeah, because I don't think that the IT team and the IT leader is there to be the source of all ideas and the owner of the ideas. And I think it's kind of, I can understand why it happens, but if you're in a position where you're saying, "Oh, I've got an idea and I want my idea to be the one that's taken forward," I don't understand why that's useful for the business, right? Your job as an IT leader is to educate and build your business up to the point where they are asking for stuff that you can deliver, and they're asking for the right stuff. So in this, we're talking about, the board's asking for what should we invest in IT? Really, what you really want to get to is the point where people in the business, managers in the business, are horizon scanning to a certain extent and thinking about the technology that could be in place in their organization, so they can be pushing for it, rather than you going back down to them and saying, "Oh, why don't you do this?" Or why don't you use AI? Or why don't you use IoT or whatever? Really, a really healthy organization, that education is in the business. And of course there'll be people there occasionally where they will say, "Well, can we have this thing which is outlandishly expensive and not going to work?" Well, that's fine, right? I'd rather have that conversation than nothing. I'd rather have that conversation where people are asking for things which are maybe naive, than having to push it down, because that's not sustainable. You just don't have the bandwidth as an IT team to own technology thinking throughout the whole organization. So teaching, it's that, I don't know if you've ever been on a finance course for non-finance managers, which used to be a big thing, but I think technology for non-tech managers is a useful thing for an IT leader to engender in their business, and help them to own their horizon scanning rather than it being in IT.
Yeah, fair point. Thanks.
We're coming up to time, so I just sort of give everyone a chance. There's one more final question from anyone in the room, or we can do a little summary. Yeah, Tom, I see an analog hand and a digital one.
This is why I do the technologies. Yeah, just I suppose the worst case scenario is you end up in an organization which doesn't respect technology, other than I need a laptop, I've got a laptop, now leave me alone. So there's little or no interest in funding. I mean, obviously the statement there is then leave. But assuming that you actually have to work in this sort of environment, have you got any tips for avoiding, in my head, one of the easy ways of making people engage with tech is to scare them. It's not a positive way, and it's not something I've always tried to avoid, but obviously with security, well, if you don't do this, massive fines, massive problems. If we don't keep ahead with the tech, then the whole organization will cease to function. Is there a more constructive and positive way that you can think of having that sort of conversation?
Yeah, of course. You're right. If you're in an organization which and it's generally because of behaviors, you know, from people who maybe aren't going to go anywhere. There are times where you just have to say, yeah, this isn't for me, right? And you have to make that decision. But if you're in that organization where you want a positive way, I was always told there's two ways to move an elephant, right? You're not going to do it by pushing or pulling at it or whatever. You either have to frighten it somewhere or you have to lure it somewhere. You have to give it a reason to go somewhere. And that's the thing really, is to make it so compelling and sort of paint a picture of, you know, what could be, that people want to do that. And that's kind of why I talked about the sales director often being the most, you know, you're you know, in a commercial organization, and it doesn't matter who it is really, but it's the person with the ear of the leader, the person who really the leader listens to, that's going to make the decision. It's, you know, what really pushes their buttons, and how can you change their lives so they're pushing their leaders to make investments in tech.
Thank you. Yeah, brilliant.
Well, thank you all for taking such an active role within the workshop today. I think it really helps if everyone understands, from what I see, really the key thing in approach, and just kind of understanding who's in the room, where the company's at, etc. Thank you, Chris, ever so much for taking the time today to kind of walk through with us how to look at communicating with the boards. I think if there is any follow-up or thoughts, it'd be great to maybe sort of continue the conversation and see sort of what your key learnings are. But Chris, I'll sort of share with you any kind of final words of wisdom or sort of pearls of thought as we sort of bring this to a close.
This stuff isn't easy, and also the last thing I would say is that often I talk to CIOs who have eventually made their way into the board, and they've finally got there, and then they complain that nobody listens to them on the board. Nobody listens to anybody on a board. Everybody's waiting for their next time to speak, right? So the thing is not to take it personally. It takes time and, you know, experience and a lot of people management to succeed in these things. So, you know, when you get to that point where you are talking to the board, you got to have patience and really think about the cognitive load, because boards have a lot of stuff to think about. So you have to make it as simple as possible. And that's not being disparaging about anybody's ability to listen or to understand what you're saying. It really is about respecting the cognitive load of the people around that table, and getting your point across as quickly as possible. And, you know, as always, if anybody, you know, I'm on LinkedIn, give me a shout. If anybody wants to continue the conversation or ask a question later, if it occurs to you, by all means do so. I'm always happy to talk, always happy to help folks as they you know, make their way along.
Amazing. Chris, thank you